We are a show that does not usually cover Broadway, but this week I'm making an exception because, I feel like what do you do after you announce an acquisition that you're being acquired for $32 billion? Evidently, what you do, if you're Wiz, is you launch a full blown Broadway show tune production. It's called the CISO musical. It's on YouTube. I think it's been viewed now something on the order of like 16,000 times in the last 2 days. And it is a full blown, I don't know if I'm doing it justice. It is like a full blown, Broadway production. Like it's something you would see maybe like at the Oscars or like at an award show, or potentially like as an opening song to like a great thing, except the music is all original. That I can assure you. This has never been written before. You have never heard this song before.
No one has ever sung about these things.
I have never seen it. They have somehow written an entire piece of music and a song that weaves into it an incredible amount of acronyms and CISO and security logic, or, if you will, domain stuff. And I just want to say, I think it's phenomenal. And I just think this is like Wiz is breaking so many things. Forget about Google's biggest acquisition. That is secondary to, this is primarily, as the story is, it's primarily a company founded by people from Israel. Most of the security companies out of Israel have absolutely despised any type of marketing, right? I mean, it's lucky if these companies will even create a web page. It's almost out of spite that they'll create a web page. Wiz has transcended that. I mean, a few months ago, they had the dogs or the pets on the training, which I thought was great. I loved it. But this is like a whole nother level. So I don't know, Matt, can you take us behind the scenes of like, how does something like this get done? And maybe it's just because obviously this was in the works before the acquisition. You're not just pulling this off like in a day or two, right? This had the cost.
Can't AI slop this one out.
This is not AI. I can assure you.
Maybe the songs. I don't know.
I can't even imagine how expensive this was. I always, in my mind, I always do. It's like, well, that seems like a big number.
Not that expensive. Yeah.
Oh my! In a full Broadway production, you have like
not
real
a full Broadway production. It's a stage. So it's a stage.
Oh my goodness! Go ahead, keep going.
It's got some lightweight sets and maybe 10 people singing, dancing.
Oh, I think there's quite a few more than 10. I think for sure.
It's the same people over and over again.
Well, how long do you think it took them to rehearse this? Like, you can't just pull people in. This took several days. I agree with that. Maybe a week of rehearsals to get this right.
Yeah. Well, I think the real goal here was not to start a security company. It was to do an off-Broadway musical.
Is that
they're working their way up?
Is that like behind the scenes? Is this just really a set of like frustrated creative people that are like, you know what? Hollywood won't take us seriously. So what we're going to do, we're going to start a security company.
Come in the back door.
And we're coming back door.
It worked for Oracle, right?
Why not?
Yes.
That's right. Like, we're going to come in back door. We're going to put pets in our training. Now we're going to do a Broadway musical. So I was thinking, what do we want next? Like, will they do like an action thriller? Or maybe kind of I love the mystery box shows. Like Severance just finished, loved it. Like a full-on mystery box kind of show, like funded maybe through, like maybe on YouTube, Google. Like I think I really want to see it continue, because I have to think that the people at Google were like, I mean, you can't. I think probably 16,000 views are coming from the Google marketing team. Like, can you imagine how this was sent around? Like, hey, look at what they're doing. Look at what we're doing. Because I think the Google conference is coming up. I think it may be next week or the week after. And I'm like, is anything going to rival this? I don't think so. I think you've stolen the show, literally stolen the show from GCP already.
So probably in the terms of the acquisition is they have to maintain a full Broadway production at all times.
Well, I think it's fantastic. I mean, kudos to the marketing team. The Wiz marketing team, just on fire. I'm sure they've already been interviewed a million times, but I actually want a full behind the scenes of all these things. Like, who's pitching them?
The best part is how in the dark they keep everyone else at Wiz. So we wake up to these. Well, I wake up to them because they all happen in North America time. And there's just, these threads where people are like, oh my God, what have you done? In a good way. I mean, just, the research team, the marketing team, they're they're playing at a very high level. So good job, everybody.
They are. Their game is high level, and I hope it continues on. And like I said, if you know what they could also do at Wiz, though, it's like, you know what's great, some podcast marketing. So always remember, Wiz, call us. Like we talk about you all the
Yeah,
time, but
maybe we
you can
could
always.
do maybe a crossover episode with Crying Out Cloud.
Yeah, maybe something along those lines. Like, hey, I mean, it's great you're doing these great Broadway productions, but how about a podcast ad here or there? Or if you're not Wiz and you're just someone listening to this podcast and you want your company to sponsor it, you should say like, look what the Wiz did. You know what we can do in software defined talk? Nothing like that, but it'll be creative and fun.
Wait
and
a second. Wait a second.
It'll be a lot less
Kote's
expensive.
Kote's not here, so I'm going to volunteer him for some singing and dancing.
You know what? We could at least get, I'll tell you this. He probably won't sing, but we could get a dramatic reading of your ad with Kote and that deep voice of his, maybe like a sort of like a Samuel L. Jackson kind of thing. So we can offer that. I don't think Wiz can do that. So contact us if you want to do some ads. So, all right. Well, congratulations to Wiz. But while Wiz is making, exciting new things, our old friend is back. Our monitoring is what I like to call it. So there's been a lot of stuff being written about observability. And so I want to start with, I think, my longstanding rant that I'm going to give again is like, it's all just monitoring. Let me just first start there. I think all of these new words just go to confuse everyone. And we're going to talk about it more. And my take on this is, let me say it this way. I guess it's sort of like monitoring is usually pitched as like, that's old, that's legacy. That's sort of like red light, green light. All people are doing is looking at parameters and thresholds. They don't really care, if you will, about the entire system. And I'm going to say to everyone, it's like, I never believed that's what monitoring was about. Back when we were working in this a lot, Matt, it was always about trying to keep the systems running, right? And trying to make sure that the customers could have it. You only had a certain set of tools. Most of the tools were essentially about, picking out thresholds, but nobody was just like, oh, this is perfect, right? This is all we want to do. We don't want to look at the entire system. And I think that's the problem I guess I have was observability. They sort of come in and say, it's like, oh, well, you're not looking at the entire health of the system. No, that's exactly what monitoring's been doing all along, right? And back in the day, we used to call it like end user monitoring and other things like that. So I think the whole idea of observability and this idea that like, oh, people didn't get it and like, that's just monitoring. It's like saying to a doctor that maybe learned originally, it's like, well, all the doctor's going to do is take your blood pressure and tell you if it's high or low. They're not concerned with your health. It's like, no, everyone in monitoring has always been concerned with looking at everything. So I think this distinction with observability has just been a setback and confusing for everyone. So that's why I just kind of hate this term observability in general. Well, what are your thoughts, Matt?
I do remember arguing when I worked at a monitoring company when they tried to call themselves a management company. And I was like, no, you're still, you can call yourself monitoring, you can call yourself observability, but at no point are you, at no point are you behind the wheel. And to me, that's the line to management, where you're actually controlling things. Moving from observability to 1 to 2, I get it, right? You no longer have to kind of pick and choose. You get like the full gamut of everything that's available to you, and then you spelunk through that to find what's useful. That's great, but I think I'm not sure I follow this observability 3.0 thing. Is this a thing, Brandon?
Well, we're gonna get to that. Well, I guess let me start there. It's sort of like, I guess coming back to it, it's sort of like the problem with observability, and I guess I'm gonna go back and say like the dilemma with all of this. I'm gonna go back to just calling it monitoring, right? Was always, and we've all seen this, is like you kind of always have two choices, right? You can instrument locally, right? Dare I say it, put an agent, put some software, do something on, if you will, the local area where code is running, and you can get a lot of granular data. The problem with that, of course, is that now you're affecting that machine or that VM and you're consuming resources. And a lot of times people don't want you touching their software for whatever reason, right?
Sure.
So of course, then Matt, you and I are very familiar with this argument. So then you come in, we used to call it agentless, call it remote APIs, call it whatever you want. It's like, hey, we're not going to touch your software. We're just going to remotely get data from what it is. And we're going to look at that data. The problem is it's not as granular. And then of course, if you want to keep more data, you're then inundated with so much data because you're, if you will, taking in the data from all the different servers and all the different applications. So you have to find some way to summarize that data, and view that data in a central location. So this seems like, to me, like no matter what happens in this industry, we are always, if you will, balancing those two things, right? And I think where it feels like observability now is, at least observability 2.0, if you want to call about that, is that like so much data is being ingested that when it costs a lot of money to store, people are being charged a lot for observability solutions. And then there's just the general, like, what am I going to do with all this data? How do I get value out of all this data? And now there are many tools that will claim to have it, but it's sort of like what I think people are kind of struggling with is like, I'm just swimming in, kind of unnecessary data. And that's really where I think people view observability today as being frustrating. So enter our friends at Bitdrift. I say our friends, but I don't really know them. They're really coming at it. And I think they're just coming back to they're just coming back to the same thing they're saying before. They're basically saying like, well, the problem is like people are just overpaying for observability. And what do you need to do? Well, their pitch is like, hey, we're only going to get the data when it's necessary. So we're going to store everything locally and mostly on mobile devices from what I can tell. So it's kind of a little trick, right? It's like, well, like we'll let you store some data on devices that people probably aren't as sensitive about. And then we're going to pull in that data when we actually need it. Of course, lots of problems with that, of course, right? Like when you're actually experiencing some type of real-time outage, like you generally want to see all the data. You can't be like, oh, hold on, let me go get all the data because during the outage may not be ready, may not be useful.
Everything leading up to it has, you don't have all the clean signal that was happening before the event. So you're just like, oh, that machine stopped responding. Hopefully it comes back on and gives me a trace of everything that was happening before it went offline. But we don't know anything.
Exactly. And that's the dilemma there, right? So they're kind of coming at it from like, oh, we're not going to have you swimming in all this unnecessary data that's really expensive to store and hard to summarize it. We're coming out with observability 3.0. But, I guess Charity Majors, I guess she was the one, I don't know. I think she's the one that coined observability 2.0. I don't know if that's, maybe someone can
coined observability 1.
I guess all of it. Let's just like say she coined all of that, all of the observability stuff. Let's be clear, right?
Well done.
But so she's kind of come out and said, well, kind of picking apart some of the problems there. But I think, like, to me, I just kind of come back to like, well, you kind of deserve this. And she even mentioned this in her own blog post. It's like, well, if you're going to call it like observability 2.0, or if you're going to put the number on it, you're just sort of inviting someone to be like, oh, well, I'm going to increment it, right? It's not C, it's C++. Call it
observability 2025.
Right. Well, that's during our day, it would have been observability 2000, right? During the turn of the century. That was back in the day. So I don't know. I sort of like, as she kind of says, like, I kind of don't have any sympathy for anyone in this. I kind of look at all of this observability. It's like,
stop right there. I don't have any sympathy for anyone.
I really don't. I just sort of, it's all nonsense, right? It's all nonsense. It's like, these are just monitoring tools that have evolved over time that allow people, if you will, to get a better insight into their systems as needed. And I just think like the fact that everyone keeps trying to like invent a new word. And if you will, I get the game. Don't listen. I know what's going on here. It's like, you want to have the Gartner MQ. You want to own the word that the analysts are going to use. You want to, if you will, come out with something new and do some thought leadership. But I think all of this just gets to a point that it's so frustrating that it just confuses everyone, right? And so in some ways, I feel like everyone's getting what they deserved here, right? You're all going to be lumped together in this massive confusion. And you know what? Yes. On top of this, I'm going to go, I don't know how exactly they did it, but back to Datadog. Like they have the dog graphic, the purple thing. And it's like, they're just sitting here, they're just like, what we do? We do monitoring. We make more money than all of you. And like, it doesn't even matter. Like you want to put us in the box. You want to put us in the Datadog puppy pen. We're happy over here because there's lots of food and there's plenty of money. And all of you are out here arguing about nonsense. So that's why that's my take on all of that.
I think the real take is if you want to win observability, put on a musical.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess it kind of comes out to is like, I feel like this. So I think observability 3.0 is kind of dead on arrival, because I think when you go to 3, it sort of means that the meme, if you will, is played out, right? It's time to do something different. So
it's almost like a diminishing return. So like some sort of exponential like fall off. It's like, oh yeah, 1x, that's great. 2x, yeah, okay, sure. And then it just keeps falling. And, it just plateaus out. When you say observability 8, people are gonna be like, what? What was wrong with 3? 3 was fine, right? It's diminishing returns here.
It's like a movie series that's gone too long. You're like, what version are we
Right,
on?
right, right. So instead of
What's
calling
going
it
on?
10, you call it X, right? Or instead of continuing the numbering scheme, you call it Too Fast. Or wait, they already did Too Fast, Too Furious. Um, yeah, you know what I'm
There are
saying.
many of them, many puns on the sequel titles. Now, okay, so the other thing that popped up this week was like, okay, so observability is sort of dying out, at least as a marketing
No,
word.
it's not dying out. It's
I know I'm making it die out. How do I make? I want to manifest it dying out. But okay, no, go ahead, finish your thought.
well, no, it's not dying out. It's never going away. Just full stop. There will always be a need to pay attention to your stuff.
Right. I'm always going to call that monitoring. It's like, I guess it's like music. It's like you just like the music that you grew up with, like when you were between the ages of 18 to 21.
No
I'm an
point,
18. I'm a monitoring person that came up in the Gen X. It's always it's like Nirvana.
you're not going to show up and be like, hey, fellow kids, let me show you Nagios, right? You're not gonna win any friends with that. Yeah,
You don't know me that well. I'm gonna show up with Nagios and an Excel spreadsheet to be like, this is how it's done, people. I don't care what all these people say. We're pulling out some CSV. So not to be outdone then. So okay, so where are we going next? So a company this week here that we sort of know some people involved in it. They're called Control Theory. So they've secured $5 million in funding, and they're going to bring, and I am not making this up, they're going to bring controllability to observability. Okay, that is their pitch. So let me quickly read their definition. So again, we all know the game here. It's like you always want to own like the new word, right? So they're sort of like, oh, observability is dead, just like how observability was like monitoring's dead. So they're defining controllability as the next evolution of observability, shifting from merely monitoring systems to actively shaping their behavior in real time. While observability helps teams understand system states, controllability introduces feedback loops that allow direct influence over systems performance and cost. Matt, are you buying any of this? Are you buying that this is where we need to go, right? Because before you answer, I come back to my monitoring monologue I've already given. It's like, just like the doctor, even the people that were quote unquote using monitoring tools were always seeking to control the systems, make them better, improve them, find new things. So it's like, it's always these weird kind of straw men that people kind of say. It's like, oh, well, people were just looking at a dashboard and not doing anything. It's like saying all the doctor did was read your vital signs. They never actually helped you. No, of course. The doctors use whatever tools they have to diagnose your problem, and then they try to come up with some solution, just like people in monitoring, just like people in observability. But I think controllability is sort of putting forth that like, oh, well, we haven't had direct influence over our systems and performance and our costs. But like, isn't that what we've always been trying to do? Like, does this resonate with you in any meaningful way?
Oh, that is the slipperiest of slopes, right? Because everybody's always like, oh, could we just automatically do this? And the trigger word there is just, followed by automatically, because I mean, I don't know control theory, but let's just say you have a monitoring tool and it says, oh, usage is too high. I'm going to start, creating more resources to feed that. Well, maybe you've just exploded out a Bitcoining network, on behalf of your folks, and you're just pouring gasoline on the fire. Or conversely, you might say like, oh, usage is low. Let's start winding some things down. Well, what about DR? What about dealing with spikes and stuff? I mean, infrastructure is responsive and fairly fast these days, but when you introduce automation, people always say they want it, and then when you start to get into it, you're like, well, what do you do when it does this? And you're like, well, I don't want to do that. It's like, well, it's not a smart system. I mean, monitoring is usually like if then else kind of logic. And oh, sure, we'll slap some AI on it, but I get nervous around automatically doing things, which sounds funny. I've worked in monitoring and security and automation, but when most users don't actually want a system doing stuff without their hand at the wheel, and so this just you know, I worry about this kind of thing because once it gets into a large production system, that's probably too complex. You know, name an enterprise that doesn't have 1,000 applications, and maybe that's the market. But there's a lot of people in the Fortune 500 who have hundreds, if not thousands, of things running, and to try to slap some automation on top of that feels dangerous.
Agreed. And the part here that, like, I would
And
say
then
almost
not not automation, but we'll call it auto remediation.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So the other part that I guess that really jumps out at me too, is I've read through this a little bit more, is that, they sort of, I guess they're saying the following is that controllability is really, if you will, not only the next evolution of observability, but they're really ultimately trying to look at observability data and figure out if the data itself is correct. And so they call these meta metrics. So they call it, like, one idea is this idea of cost control. So it uses meta metrics to analyze observability data, identify cost drivers, and apply smart filtering and storage solutions to reduce expenses. So that's just a long way of saying it's like, hey, we know you're spending too much on observability. And the reason you're spending too much is, like, you've instrumented a lot of stuff in your code, right? And you're starting to send all of this data back to your observability solution. That's costing you a ton of money in storage and probably confusing you. So hence their solution is metametrics. And it's like, we've done this before, like back in the monitoring days. You take a couple of metrics and you try to create something new. And it's like, I don't know. This is one of these things where it's like, I feel like it's more harm than good, because then you start looking at some manufactured metric, and you're like, either you don't know it's manufactured, which is really bad, or it's sort of like a metric that's sort of, even if it's simple, even if it's just an average, right? You're like, you're never totally sure if that metric is actually correct. You're like, well, it's an average. It's okay if 0 to 100 it averages to 50, but those two data points mean very different things. So I don't know, this idea that, and this is where I think it's like, we're like close to like almost like losing the thread. It's like, literally, we started with monitoring, if I accept that, right? And just like, let's give me the raw data. Observability is sort of like saying, hey, there's too much raw data. Let's kind of piece all of this together, right? And we'll start to build out the overall system. But now configurability is starting to say, it's like, well, there's too much observability data. Let's try to summarize that data, and let's figure out where it's coming from and create a set of meta metrics on top of that. So it's like one more layers. It's like, what is it? What's the statement? It's like, turtles all the way down. It's like, what are we even looking at? Like, we're like, so much of this data has been manufactured. Like who could comprehend all of this is I guess my thought about, like, who's looking at this data, and what could anyone do with all of this if you could understand it all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole field of tools that have kind of gotten into the space of reducing your monitoring bills. Uh, I mean, you've got like Cribble over in the Splunk
Yeah.
space, where
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to because everybody, people who use Splunk love Splunk. I mean, I'm
Yes.
sorry, it's a classic, right?
Yeah.
It's a classic, but the number one complaint of Splunk is the cost, because when you hook up multiple fire hoses, you're paying for it. And so then people are like, well, I need another tool to reduce the pressure in my fire hose, and make them smarter fire hoses. Uh, and so that sounds great, but is that really? I feel like that's something that if you're Splunk or Datadog or anybody else who charges on consumption, you want to give people, um, you want to own those tools, because that lets somebody else define how you make your money. So these tools that are like, oh, we'll fix that problem. Well, don't you think that at some point, Datadog will be like, oh, we now have edge caching to reduce your storage bills or for ingestion, because you're paying for that stuff. But they can throw you a bone as like, oh, we're helping you save money by not leaving Datadog. Um, I to me, this is a niche solution that I would expect the incumbents should be able to, like, you know, I know you don't want to like kill the golden goose of charging on ingress and all that, but also like you don't want to alienate your customers. So if you see, those curves of customer retention is starting to dip and the common complaint is cost, well then, you can play with that. or you could take the Broadcom approach.
So, so we should then predict that we just believe controllability, or I'd say cloud control theory. If this idea gets any traction, it seems like it would be easily acquired by like one of either the observability vendors or the monitoring vendors,
if
or
it's a problem,
or even the cloud vendors if they really wanted to like have some more
and
cost containment.
Right, the cloud vendors, if you're having problems with CloudWatch, you call up your AWS rep, and you'll be like, "Yo, help me," and
give me a discount.
No, well, you don't have to say you don't have to start with give me a discount. Well, you start with give me a discount. You're saying I'm paying too much for this,
and then you're like send over the Matt Ray to make me do this better. No.
But then they'll be like, oh, let me head up my SE and see what he does, and they've got a playbook for can you keep it all in the availability zone? Can you reduce this? Because customers of Datadog and other observability tools, they felt this pain, and so they know how to find some savings on the edges of this thing, because AWS, they're not in the business of charging. Well, they're in a lot of businesses, but their primary business is not ingress egress. It's a large percentage of it, but they want to keep you for the long term, and so they're willing to like, oh yeah, we'll reduce that. Similarly, the observability players who are they don't really want to make their money off that. They don't want to make their money off a percentage of your AWS spend. Well, maybe they do, but my point is they'd rather keep you as a happy customer than have you leave for cost reasons of things that are not their product.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of this, I guess where I kind of come down as I think about where if you will, the practitioner, the poor person that has to like use all these tools, it really comes down to, and I'd like your take on, because you're insecurity, but it's the same kind of problem. It really is. I mean, if you're the person kind of responsible for this, it's like picking which tools you choose in your tool bag, if you will, tool belt, is so important, right? And I think being willing to like kick people out, right? When people come in with a new word, I guess all the words now have ability at the end of it, is like, I think almost by definition, you should be very skeptical, right? Before you pull one of these in and say, okay, like we really need it, we're going to pay for it, and we're going to get all this data. Because like, I do feel like a lot of times you're just going to be swimming in a whole nother set of data set. You're going to spend a lot of money. You're going to have a giant data lake of like monitoring and log file data that either no one looks at or no one really knows how to use it. And so I guess it kind of comes back to like, it is in a lot of ways putting the work back on the actual end users who are actually buying these tools, because you're making it so hard for them to even pick, right? So this is why like, the long running joke is like the number one observability tool in the world. I'm pretty sure it's still Nagios, right? That's what people are mostly using, right? I mean, that's deployed everywhere. It's used everywhere. It's probably used in conjunction with like a million other tools, but it's everywhere.
That defines observability 1.0. It's like, there's nothing smart happening here.
But there is at some point where you're like, I just need the basics.
And
that's because that's all I can do, right?
That is the floor. That is the baseline is, I want to capture things and record them. And that's all I'm asking. I'm not, and then everything over that is 1.1, 1.2, 2.0, everything, caching at the edge, smart filtering. That's all. 1.0 is, I monitor things and I send them somewhere else, or, I monitor things and someone pulls them from me. It's, whatever, but that is your baseline. There's no smartness about it. I mean, love me some Nagios, but there's nothing smart about it. It's just, I'm grabbing stuff.
Right. And I think that's the part where I kind of come back to, it's like all these tools are pitched as sort of like better, faster, not cheaper, right? It's almost better, faster, bigger. But I do come back to, it's like there is so many times when people are actively troubleshooting where it's like, I don't think a lot of these tools, I question the value. I'm like, are you really finding and fixing problems faster, right? Because even as we try to, like, in theory, we get paid to, and we spend a lot of time looking at this, even us going through all of this literature, all of these words, like just trying to make sense of all of these tools, much less use them all. This is why I think you just have to be extremely diligent about picking any of these tools and putting in your environment. If you love, maybe observability is great. Maybe it's what he wants, but it's like at some point, it's like, what everyone ends up doing? Opening up the log file, looking at the log file. Let's look at the log file. Let's go actually just see what's in it. Right. I think you have to be really careful. That's why I'm just like skeptical of I'm skeptical of all the abilities.
But it's an evergreen business, right? You know that there's always something that's being built as a reaction to the shortcomings of the previous tool.
Now, speaking of evergreen businesses, there was another one that launched today. This is like the greatest hits of software defined talk. Some cloud veterans, I'm just going to read the press release here. Cloud veterans launch Config Hub to fix configuration hell. And this is right out of what you were saying. It's sort of like, I haven't, if you will, taken a deep look at this, but I was just sort of like, it feels like you can launch a company every year that you just say configuration hell. And it's just like, well, of course you're in configuration hell. And their pitch is sort of like, well, it's too complicated. We need some way to centralize it. But, Matt, with your deep expertise in the world of, configuration management, I think it always comes back to like, it's kind of what I was saying before. It's like the first question you have to ask yourself, like in 2 years, will this new company just be part of the configuration hell they're talking about? Or will they actually have fixed something new? And is it even reasonable when someone comes in, it's like, oh, it's configuration hell. We're going to have some centralized way of doing it, kind of like a GitHub, but like for configuration. I look at this and I say to myself, it's like, this is great venture capital pitch deck, but like, I am so skeptical, like I am with all the monitoring stuff, that anything will fundamentally change after this. It feels like just another tool that will be sitting on the shelf, or if you will, in configuration hell with all the other tools. What are your thoughts about this? Is the configuration world ripe for innovation?
So my big problem with this is, in my 10 minutes of due diligence on this article, I can't figure out what they do. I can't figure out what their focus is. I see stuff about like, oh, we're fixing configuration, but they don't tell you how, right? So is this, even at the early days of like System Initiative, which is trying something aggressively new and different, they were like, this is how we're going to do it differently. This one is just, I can't find anything that tells me anything. Like it's literally just like, we're gonna control and manage stuff, and we're gonna fix configuration hell, and I'm like, how? Right? You go to the FAQ and they're like, "Are you guys gonna do open source?" And like, we love open source. We'll throw some out. I'm like, how? What? They're like, we're gonna do a SaaS. I'm like, I don't care how you make your money. I want to know what this thing is and how it changes. My use of Puppet or Chef or Ansible or what is different about this? There's nothing here other than they raise some money.
Sure. So maybe
they're industry veterans, like
industry veterans. Well, maybe we'll give Config Hub. Maybe we'll give them a 6-8 months to put something else. But it is one of these things that I guess it just felt really tied together. It's like you were saying before. It's like it's just greenfield products year after year. It's like reinventing monitoring, reinventing observability, reinventing configuration. But it is one of these things where it's like the repetition, I think, feels faster, and it also feels like these tools are just like they go from like new and shiny to like on the shelf. Like it feels like overnight, right? It feels like, and it's just like, it's getting to the point where it's like, it's just absurd to me. Go ahead.
It is absurd. And I think, I've said this before. I think the problem with many of these tools is if you don't have a compelling open source component, you will be replaced by a compelling open source component. And so like, this config hub, I don't know anything about it, but is it better than, Terraform / OpenTofu? Is that what they're trying to do? Because why would I not just use Ansible? It's fine for, under 1,000 machines or whatever. That's a lot of infrastructure. Or, yes, that is a hell, but it's a hell I know, and it's a well-explored hell, right? And there's a lot of people a nice in map. This hell. There are nine levels to this hell, but they're all well written about, and scholars have been going over them for years. And so, yes, configuration management hell, well traversed. You can always hire people who've been there, right? That's my point. Is like if you trying to break into this kind of market without something compelling really compelling is going to be super hard. And if it's really compelling and you don't have an open source angle, someone will make an open source angle. They're like, that's a good idea. Here's something that is not as good, but it's free, and we have this community that picks up all the crumbs, all the things that you can't be bothered with because it's not on your product management roadmap. But somebody shows up and they're like, can you do OpenStack? And you're like, no, it's not on a roadmap. And then Korea Telecom's like, oh well, we have 100,000 servers on it now. We just did it. That's the kind of stuff that happens when you have open source, because you need to have that for infrastructure, because there's too many weird angles. And if you look at like the ecosystems for a lot of monitoring tools, they try to make it easy for you to onboard new stuff, where they have SDKs and they have that kind of stuff. And maybe these guys will do that, but I don't know. I'm hesitant.
I'm with you. And
That's
I think
my
what
rant.
all of these people need to do, whether it's our friends that are not friends, I should say, the people at Config Hub, the new people that are pitching a control theory that are doing controllability, maybe even charity managers and observability. What they really need is a Broadway show tune. That's what I think they ultimately need, because then at least that would be really entertaining for us. Like I would watch that and really probably be in a good mood. Whereas like I read these blog posts, always at the end, I'm just like, I'm not in a good mood. I'm never happy at the end. I'm never
They're
happy.
making you angry.
They kind of do. They kind of make me angry because, but when I watch the puppies on Wiz or when I'm watching the show tune, I'm always like, oh, love those guys. That was so much fun. Had such a good time together. So
maybe you even learned something. No, just
exactly.
puppies.
Now, some people potentially not having a good time, and I don't really want to delve into politics on this show, but I felt like this one at least was worth a mention. It sounds like the Doge team is planning to rebuild the entire, as reported here, Social Security Administration code base in a matter of months. So it's essentially a large COBOL application from what I can tell. I don't know exactly what they're doing, how they're rewriting it, but they're going to try to do this in a month. And I was thinking to myself, this may be like the largest modernization gamble of all time, right? Like I don't know of a system quite this big, and certainly not this is important. Like people obviously depending on these payments to live their lives. I can't imagine anything has been written like this in several months. And all I can say here is like I just look at this like don't do it. Like nothing about this. Like what I mean? I know people are like, we can put people on Mars. I'm like, yeah, you can, but this problem is a lot harder than putting people on Mars. Like I really do, because it kind of reminds me of the
when
old.
You're putting people on Mars, yeah, it's like oh, I'm putting 10 people on Mars. I'm putting 100. Social Security has 73 million users, right?
Right, but
people
this
who
is
count on this.
And I guess this is exactly why I guess I'm not running some type of observability startup or something along these lines. Like I just look at this, like everything about this, like to me is like a red flag. It's like, it just goes back to like, it's like when you hire the new developers and they're like, you know what, we need to rewrite the system. And it's like, I know why you feel that way, but I don't think we should. There's a lot of things in this system that we don't know about. There's a lot of weird edge cases that work, and they work so well, we don't even know they exist. So when we start rewriting this thing, we're going to not only are we going to introduce our own bugs, we're going to learn about all of the things the old system did, right? Like call it like the daylight savings time bugs, right?
I'll one up you one more. And we're going to fire everybody who knows anything about it today.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, but I will say though, but it's like, I like these ideas of natural experiments. Like I don't, like this seems like the stakes are way too high, but I guess here we are. I mean, no one's going to listen to me. Like, don't do it. But it is one of these things. Like if you could somehow prove that you can rewrite this entire system in a matter of a few months and go from COBOL to like some modern system and it actually work, that would be an incredible achievement. Like I think we would all be like, you did it. You deserve, you deserve the award, best modernization project of all time.
I think the real plan here is to flip Social Security over to XAI in 3 years.
I don't know. Well, I think it's funny too that like this one, the only bigger project I think, of course, is my long running project of like the IRS, basically the tax system in the
Well,
United
they
States. So
fired
like,
them too. So
but I would think that would be the bigger project. It'd be like, okay, well, this is just payments out for the most part, Social Security,
right.
like
Well,
payments
it's
coming in.
recording and
Yeah,
yeah.
I guess you're right. It kind of works both ways, but like payments coming in, like that's now you're messing with the incoming revenue. So that would be even bigger. So I don't know. I mean, like I said,
They
I
don't
don't,
care about that either. Yeah.
um, but it's like, I always think like, none of, of course, like, we deal with our families and our friends and they have no idea, either no idea what we do or they don't care about what we do. And it's like, I see something like this. I'm like, wow, could like the newscast be talking about like app modernization and the transition from COBOL to Java? Will they be interviewing Cote about Spring and like it'll actually come to a point where like people actually care because payments, all that would mean though is like payments have been affected and people are very, very upset. So I don't know. We're gonna watch this. I don't know anything else to do other than like, I guess, kind of cheer for them, cheer for success. But like, if anyone's listening that has the power, I'd be like, hey, maybe this is the time to be like, we should work on a much smaller project to start with. I don't know what else. There's a lot of governmental systems. Maybe there's some other like maybe we should work on like the vacation planning system or the vacation request system at the government versus the actual Social Security. Something much lower stakes is what I would recommend.
I think they're doing air traffic control.
Oh well, that's don't. Now you're making me more nervous, man.
I don't even want
Um,
to fly.
Now in the world, you mentioned X, but our friends over at OpenAI looks like they've closed. I'm going to read this number: $40 billion in funding on a valuation of $300 billion. So I kind of put in my notes here, like there are only two outcomes here. There's either the WeWork outcome, and this becomes a great Hulu documentary because it's
Oh, I'm looking
um,
forward.
it could just be a massive waste of money because it is the person over in Japan, right, has led the what is it? Who's the SoftBank, right? See, it is so disturbing. Even Matt's dog is concerned about it, right? And so SoftBank has kind of led this funding. I think they've led up to like $30 billion, and of course they led the fund in WeWork. Or the more, I guess the optimistic case would be that they can go out and actually do it, and if you will, be the next Google. So we'll see what happens ultimately as they move forward. But Matt, what I really wanted in your take is like, what do you believe? Do you think if you had to pay, if you will, give the bull case, why is ultimately OpenAI going to be worth $300 billion, if not more?
Because they're the only people in the game, right?
Well, I do think the thing you could say, right, is ultimately with Google, right, it's like you could make the case that they are the next Google, right? That like they are basically going to take over Google and that all that they need to do is at some point, although they don't want to do it, and this is like a Ben Thompson take, so I'm kind of stealing it from him. It's like when they introduce some type of advertising model, that it is ultimately successful. And that's ultimately how they get to like these incredible search engine type returns. I think that's the bull case.
I but I think this is kind of like what we saw with Docker, where nobody wants the next VMware, and everybody started to put their chips into OpenAI, and then they started to hedge their bets with other players, and now they're starting to come out around the corners and be like, those guys are great and all, but we do the same thing. We have those models. We have oh they've got their models, but we can run 4 or 5, and so the incumbent cloud players they don't want. I don't yes, Microsoft's an investor, but also like, they're keeping their enemies close because they know like we don't want these guys to somehow, cut us out of the pie. And so, I there's a ton of competition in the space. Um, there is the floor is rapidly rising. The DeepSeek showed that like, well, maybe the moats aren't as big as you thought they were. Maybe the cost to entry isn't that great. Yes, you might have, oh, our AI model is so great, but we're already starting to see cracks where OpenAI started to say, well, maybe we'll start to do some open weights models because they're feeling the competition from open source, right? And that's once you're feeling the competition from open source, you know that there's a ceiling in sight. Um, that you're going to have a hard time pulling away from the pack. And once if you can't pull away from the pack, maybe you can get to 300 billion, but there might be, three or four $300 billion companies,
Mhm.
and that just makes it, this is like similar to our conversations about AI IDEs. It's like, yeah, I see a hard time capturing all of it, and if just like observability, if you have a good enough idea, someone will come at you for your margins. They'll be like, it's not as good, but it's cheaper. Um, AI is that way. You'll be like, oh, well, I need to buy, the super duper LLM. I'm like, no, actually, you just need a small language model because your use case is focused, and it'll be the tenth of the price. You're like, cool, right? So I think there's a natural ceiling on this, both from competition and technology. You know, prove me wrong, but 300 billion is a lot.
You made a good case there for the bear case, and I think some of your examples there are good. I think the VMware, no one wants to know the VMware. That's a really good example. But the only, I guess, as I was struggling in my mind, I think, but why would you do this? Like, if smart people are investing, what do they at least talk themselves into? And I think the closest thing I can say is like, well, search for a long time was a commodity, right? At least back, even when Google was launched, people were like, oh, there's Yahoo and there's like Alta Vista and a million other searches, but like ultimately Google was able to establish, at least at that time, a better product and a much stronger brand. And even though today, like, for the most part, if you put Bing results side by side with Google results and kind of a blind study, there is no difference. Like, we know there's a huge difference. Google
Look,
has, like, 90% of the, if not more, 90% of the market share. So I think this is, I guess, is the bull case is like OpenAI, because I've just noticed myself. It's like I kind of, if you will, move around and use different ones just at different times. But like
right.
I do find myself coming back to ChatGPT just kind of out of habit. It's not even I think it's better. It's just sort of like I just come back to Google when I really have to search. It's not like I do anything or have like something that I really think is better. It's just sort of my default. So I think there is kind of like a stealth case here. It's sort of like OpenAI for the longest time just deflects. They say they're not going to do any type of advertising model. They wait, and then eventually, in a few months, they just roll it out, and it's just like boom, we've got an advertising model, and now we can really turn on the profit model, because that's the only way. I think there's only an ad model can get them to this valuation. There is not enough people in the world willing to subscribe to anything, I think, that gets to this level. It just isn't. Like, look at YouTube's a good example. Like, I am a YouTube premium subscriber. I like it. I don't like watching the ads, but most people aren't, right? Most people don't want to pay that. And I think the same thing will happen here. Go ahead. Oh, for all those watching the stream, sadly, it looks like we've we've lost Matt for a moment. Let's see if he comes back. Are you back, Matt?
I'm getting you.
Is it my side or your side?
It's always my side.
It's always Australia. I can kind of hear you now. Maybe turn off your video for a second, see if that clears up your audio. How about now? Are you okay?
No, it's come on.
Okay, now you start to sound good again. No, still, you're still kind of the computer voice.
I lost my.
That's fine. We can bring it back.
What's going on? Let me check and see if there's any others or anything. Can't even bring up the app.
Nothing. You're just dead.
Here. Uh-oh. There was another.
Let me see here. Is Matt breaking up? Okay. Hey, for those in the stream, Michael or Brett, like I assume, can you hear me, Brandon? Okay, and is Matt just breaking up for you guys as well, or is it something bigger? Okay, so it sounds, at least for those in the chat, Matt, it looks like it's your side.
Great.
Let me turn your video back on. Let's see. At least I can see you again. See if it clears up at all. You still there? Are you on forever? Oh, too funny, Michael. Too funny. All right. Well, I think Matt is gone. We've lost him forever. But while I appreciate everyone hanging in here, I'll go ahead and wrap up the show with a little thing here at the end, and then hopefully Matt will return. And if so, we'll maybe record a little bit more. But here's what you hear at the end of the show. So I'll say something. Well, we had a little bit of an error. Unfortunately, we lost Matt way down in Australia, but we did want to do a couple quick things here. First, if you would like a sticker, please go ahead and email your postal address to stickers@softwaredefinedtalk.com. I'll be happy to send you a sticker anywhere in the world. There are some conferences coming up. There's DevOps Days Atlanta. That's April 29th to the 30th. And then there's Cloud Foundry Day in the US. That's May 14th. You probably see Cote, at least Cloud Foundry Day, if not some others. And then on the front of recommendations, this this week, I have been playing with OrbStack, which is a great little, if you will, plug-in replacement for Docker desktop. It's fast, light, and simple, as they say. So if you're on a Mac and you're willing to, if you will, try something different than Docker desktop, I think OrbStack deserves it. It's a fun little product and something that I've enjoyed using. So with that, I appreciate everyone hanging in on the stream, as well as everyone that's listening on the podcast now. And with that, we will talk to you next time. All right, Michael, Brett, thanks for hanging in. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We'll do better next time. All right, everyone, have a good one. Bye.